The flash of the camera bulbs was a punctuation mark at the end of our daughter Lily's childhood, each burst of light capturing her triumphant smile as she clutched her diploma. I felt a surge of pride so immense, it was a physical pressure in my chest. 22 years of nurturing, of late-night study sessions, of scraped knees and fevers, all culminating in this perfect, sun-drenched moment. Richard, my husband of 25 years, leaned in close, his arm still draped around my shoulders in a pantomime of shared joy. His breath was warm against my ear, smelling faintly of the expensive whiskey he'd started drinking. "I'm leaving you," he whispered, his voice a blade of ice wrapped in velvet. "Tiffany and I have a flight to Bali tonight. I've already packed. Don't make a scene, darling, it's Lily's big day. And now please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you." It had started 6 months earlier, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in the tectonic plates of our marriage. The late nights at the office became more frequent, explained away with a casual, "Big project, you know how it is." He developed a sudden, fervent interest in fitness, trading his comfortable dad bod for sinewy muscle and a wardrobe full of clothes that were far too young for a man of 53. Then there was the smell. A cloyingly sweet floral perfume that clung to his suits like a ghost, a scent I knew wasn't mine. He would dismiss it as someone he'd stood next to in the elevator, his condescension so practiced it was almost an art form. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place during tax season, a time I had always managed because Richard found it unutterably boring. I was sorting through a mountain of digital receipts when I found it, a charge from a boutique hotel, the Gilded Lily, for a 2-night stay. It was from a weekend he had supposedly spent at a marketing conference in Chicago. The damning detail wasn't the hotel itself, but the itemized receipt attached to the expense report he'd carelessly saved to our shared cloud drive. Dinner for 2, champagne, and a charge from the spa for a couples massage. The name on the second spa booking was Tiffany Dubois, his new 24-year-old executive assistant. There was a moment of pure cold shock, a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped turning. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to pull me under. But then something else surfaced. A cold, hard clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had spent 2 decades as the supportive wife, the patient mother, the woman who had quietly shelved her own brilliant career in corporate finance to build a home and a family. He had mistaken my support for weakness, my patience for passivity. He had forgotten who I was before I became his wife. I closed the laptop, my hands steady. The tears would not come. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my sister Clara. "He's cheating on me, Clara," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It's time to go to work." Her response was immediate and exactly what I needed. "I'll clear my schedule. Send me everything you have. We're not getting sad, we're getting strategic." The first phase of my plan was observation and documentation, a skill I had honed during my years as a forensic accountant. I became a ghost in my own life, watching Richard's every move with a dispassionate, clinical eye. I compiled a timeline of his affair, cross-referencing credit card statements with his work calendar and the location data from his phone, which he had foolishly synced to the family tablet. Every lie, every fabricated business dinner, every late-night emergency was recorded in a password-protected file, complete with receipts and screenshots. While he was busy building a fantasy life with Tiffany, I was building a fortress of evidence. My next step was to secure my financial independence. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, under my own name. I began to methodically redirect funds. Small amounts at first, well within the normal household budget fluctuations he would never notice. I sold off some old, forgotten stocks that were in my name from before our marriage, their value having appreciated significantly over 2 decades. I liquidated a few pieces of jewellery he had given me over the years, items that now felt like props in a long-running play. Each transaction was a quiet act of rebellion, a brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. The centrepiece of my strategy, however, required his unwitting participation. I spent weeks with Clara and her legal team drafting a series of documents. On the surface, they were standard updates to our estate plan and family trust, something I presented to him as a necessity due to recent changes in inheritance tax law. I created a compelling narrative, complete with official-looking articles I had printed out. "Richard, darling," I had said one evening, catching him in a rare moment of domesticity, "we really need to get this sorted. It's for Lily's future." He waved a dismissive hand, his eyes glued to his phone, no doubt texting Tiffany. Of course. You handle all that boring paperwork, Sarah. That's what you're good at." He trusted me implicitly with the details he couldn't be bothered with, his arrogance a blindfold of his own making. A week later, I presented him with the thick stack of papers and a pen. He was on his way to the gym, impatient and distracted. "Just show me where to sign," he said, scrawling his signature on 10 different pages without reading a single word. He didn't see that buried within the dense legal jargon of a trust amendment was a clause that granted me his full and irrevocable power of attorney. He didn't see that the updates to his business holdings were not updates at all, but a complete transfer of his 51% majority share in his company, Vantage Marketing, to me. He just saw boring paperwork, a nuisance standing between him and his tryst. He had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, and he didn't even know it. The most delicious piece of irony lay dormant in our safe deposit box, a relic from the earliest days of our relationship. It was a prenuptial agreement. 25 years ago, Richard, then a young and ambitious man on the rise, had insisted upon it. His father had been through a messy divorce and had instilled in his son a deep-seated fear of losing his future earnings. I, a young woman in love and with my own promising career, had been deeply hurt by the request. But I signed it, seeing it as a testament to his anxieties rather than a reflection on my character. Now, that document was about to become my greatest weapon. I retrieved it from the bank one Tuesday afternoon, the cold metal of the box feeling like a treasure chest. Back in Clara's office, we spread the aging document across her mahogany desk. And there it was, in black and white, Clause 8b, the infidelity clause. In his youthful hubris, convinced that he would be the one to be wronged, Richard had insisted on a particularly punitive stipulation. It stated that in the event of proven adultery by either party, the wronged party would be entitled to 75% of all marital assets, including any businesses founded during the marriage, with the remaining 25% to be placed in a trust for any children. He had created it to protect himself from a hypothetical gold digger, never once imagining that he would become the philanderer. "He's completely forgotten this exists, hasn't he?" Clara said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. 100%, I replied. He thinks the prenup protects him. To solidify my position, I hired a discreet private investigator, a former police detective Clara recommended. I didn't need the evidence for my own peace of mind. I had that in spades. I needed it to be ironclad, irrefutable, and legally unimpeachable. The investigator, a quiet man named Miller, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 2 weeks, I had a file containing high-resolution photographs of Richard and Tiffany entering the Gilded Lily Hotel, hand in hand, images of them kissing in his car, and even a recording of him on a phone call promising her a future funded by the assets he believed were solely his. The trap was now fully constructed. Every hinge was oiled, every spring was coiled. All that was left was for the arrogant, unsuspecting target to walk into it. The biggest assets were the house and the business, the twin pillars of the life Richard believed he controlled. He was immensely proud of Vantage Marketing, the company he had built from the ground up. What he conveniently forgot, and what I had the paperwork to prove, was that the initial $50,000 seed money had come from our joint savings account, an account that had contained the entirety of my own premarital savings. My name was on the original Articles of Incorporation as a founding partner, a formality he'd dismissed at the time, but one that Clara assured me was legally significant. The documents he had so carelessly signed a few months ago were the masterstroke. Disguised as a routine transfer of assets into the family trust for tax efficiency, they were in fact a legally binding transfer of his controlling shares directly to me. He had effectively signed away his own company. The board of directors, which had previously consisted of him, his golf buddy, and a passive accountant, now had a new composition. I had used my newly acquired authority to call an emergency meeting, via email of course, and voted in a new board, myself, Clara, and a trusted former colleague from my finance days. Our first order of business had been to draft a termination letter for the CEO, Richard Price, citing gross misconduct and misuse of company funds, referencing his lavish spending on Tiffany. The second pillar was our home, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial we had bought 15 years ago. It was more than a house. It was where we had raised Lily, a repository of our shared history. But sentimentality was a luxury I could no longer afford. Using the power of attorney he had so graciously granted me, I had contacted a realtor 2 months prior. The house was listed privately, off-market, to avoid any chance of Richard seeing it online. All correspondence was sent to a post office box I had opened for this very purpose. We found a buyer quickly, a lovely family, eager to be in the school district. The closing date was set for the day after Lily's graduation. Every piece of the plan was designed to detonate simultaneously, a controlled demolition of the life he thought he was so cleverly escaping. He envisioned himself walking away with everything, leaving me with a broken heart and an empty nest. He had no idea he was about to be left with absolutely nothing. He saw me as the keeper of the home, the manager of domestic minutiae. He never once suspected that while he was planning his escape, I was planning my liberation. We are back in the moments after the graduation ceremony, the air thick with the scent of roses and unspoken truths. As Richard delivered his cruel whisper, a strange sense of calm washed over me. The pain had been processed months ago, burned away to reveal a core of cold, hard steel. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply turned to him, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, and said, "Okay, Richard." The reaction was not what he expected. A flicker of confusion crossed his face before being replaced by his usual smug certainty. He thought I was in shock, that the full weight of his proclamation hadn't landed yet. We posed for pictures with Lily, my arm linked through hers, his hand resting awkwardly on my back. Lily, ever my daughter, was preternaturally perceptive. She shot me a questioning look, her brow furrowed with concern. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message that said, "I'm okay. It's all under control." The car ride home was a symphony of silence. Richard drove, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, humming slightly off-key. He was radiating an aura of self-satisfaction, a man who believed he had just executed a flawless coup. He was waiting for the dam to break, for the tears and accusations to begin. He wanted a scene. He wanted to play the role of the long-suffering husband, finally breaking free from his drab, conventional life. But I gave him nothing. I simply stared out the window, watching the familiar suburban landscape slide by, my mind a quiet, orderly space, where every variable had been accounted for. My calmness was a foreign element in his script, and it was beginning to unnerve him. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and finally spoke. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "I suppose we should talk." I unbuckled my seatbelt. "There's nothing to talk about, Richard," I said, my voice even and cool. "You made your decision." I got out of the car and walked towards the front door, leaving him momentarily speechless. He wanted a dramatic third act. He had no idea the play was already over, and he was the only one who hadn't read the ending. We walked into the house, the familiar smell of lemon polish and old books greeting us. "I'll just grab my bags," Richard announced with an air of theatrical finality, heading for the stairs. "They're in my closet." I followed him into the foyer and waited. A few moments later, a cry of pure confusion echoed from our bedroom. "Sarah, where are my clothes? Where are my bags?" He reappeared at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of bewilderment. His perfectly packed designer luggage was gone. His entire side of the walk-in closet was bare, save for a few stray hangers. "Oh, those," I said, examining my nails with feigned indifference. "I donated them. There's a wonderful charity that helps men who have suddenly found themselves without a home or employment. I thought it was a fitting cause." His jaw dropped. The smugness was evaporating, replaced by a rising tide of anger. "You did what? You can't do that. That's my property." Before he could continue his tirade, the doorbell rang. I walked over and opened it to reveal a smiling couple in their early 40s, holding a bottle of champagne, standing next to a woman I recognized as Susan, the realtor. "Sarah, congratulations," Susan said brightly. "The Millers are just so excited to do their final walkthrough." I smiled warmly. "David, Karen, welcome. Please, come in." I took the keys from the hook by the door and held them out to the bewildered couple. "Welcome to your new home." Richard thundered down the stairs, his face turning a mottled shade of red. "What is going on here? New home? Sarah, what have you done?" he bellowed, completely ignoring the stunned family now standing in his hallway. I turned to him, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I sold the house, Richard. The sale closed this morning." He laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "You can't sell the house without my signature. It's impossible." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded document, a copy of the power of attorney. "Do you remember signing some estate planning documents a few months ago?" I asked sweetly. "The ones you couldn't be bothered to read. You gave me your full, irrevocable power of attorney. Perfectly legal. The proceeds from the sale, by the way, have been deposited into an account that you cannot access." The colour drained from his face as the Millers and their realtor backed slowly toward the door, muttering apologies. He was finally beginning to understand that this was not the scene he had planned. The screaming began in earnest as soon as the front door clicked shut behind the realtor and the new owners. It was a raw, guttural sound of impotent rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he snarled, his face contorted. "Fine, you can have the house. I'll drain every single one of our accounts. I'll leave you with nothing, begging me for money within a month." He whipped out his phone, his fingers jabbing furiously at the screen as he logged into our joint bank account. I simply waited, a silent observer to his self-destruction. The fury on his face slowly melted into confusion, then disbelief. What is this? Where is all the money? There's only $700 in here." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "That's right," I said, my voice calm and precise. "Now, I'd like to draw your attention to our prenuptial agreement, specifically Clause 8B, the infidelity clause. Do you remember it, Richard? The one you insisted on? It stipulates that in the event of proven adultery, the wronged party, that's me, is entitled to 75% of all marital assets. The rest goes into a trust for Lily. Since you so conveniently announced your affair with Tiffany at a public event, and I have a rather extensive file of your activities for the last 6 months, I think the proven part is well and truly covered." I let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow against the crumbling facade of his arrogance. But I wasn't finished. This was merely the appetizer. "But don't worry about the money, Richard," I continued, walking over to the mahogany desk in the corner of the room. I picked up a thick leather-bound folder. "We need to talk about your business." I opened the folder and slid a familiar-looking document across the polished wood towards him. It was the estate plan he had signed. I had used a highlighter on the relevant passages. You signed over your majority shares in Vantage Marketing to me 3 months ago. You transferred them into the family trust, and as trustee, I control them. As the new majority shareholder, I called a board meeting this morning. The new board and I voted unanimously. Your position as CEO has been terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct. Your corporate cards have been cancelled, and your access to the building has been revoked. Security will be boxing up your personal items tomorrow. He stared at the highlighted paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The screams had stopped. All that was left was a choked, wheezing sound. He had walked away from our marriage, to start a glamorous new life, only to find out he no longer had a house, no money, and no company. He had nothing. His entire body seemed to deflate, the rage and bluster draining out of him, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell. He sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, his head in his hands. "No," he whispered, the word a soft, desperate plea. "No, you can't. Tiffany. We have a flight." He fumbled for his phone again, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed Tiffany's name. He put the phone to his ear, his eyes pleading with me, as if I could somehow reverse the cataclysm I had unleashed. "Tiff? Baby, listen." His voice was thin and reedy. I could hear the tinny sound of her voice from across the room, impatient and sharp. He began to explain, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic, incoherent stream. "The money, it's gone. The house. She sold the house, the company, she took the company." There was a pause. I could imagine her perfectly, sitting in her rented convertible down the street, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the steering wheel, the promise of a life of luxury evaporating before her very eyes. Her reply was short, sharp, and utterly predictable. I didn't have to hear the words to know their meaning. Richard's face crumpled. "Tiffany, please, don't hang up." He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at the screen, which now showed the ended call. She was gone. The naive young woman who was so attracted to his promises of wealth and glamour had no use for a broke, unemployed, 53-year-old man. The loyalty he had purchased with lies and stolen money had a shelf life of exactly 0 seconds past his financial ruin. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pitiful hope. "Sarah, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I love you." The words were so empty, so transparently self-serving that I almost laughed. The humour of it all was breathtaking. He, the great manipulator, the master of his universe, was reduced to this. I walked over to a cardboard box I had placed by the door earlier. It contained a few old photo albums, his university track medal, and a handful of other sentimental items I felt he was entitled to. I pushed it towards him with my foot. "This is all that's left of your life here, Richard," I said, my voice devoid of heat or malice. It was simply a statement of fact. "You once told me that my greatest contribution to this family was my ability to handle the boring details. I hope you'll agree. I've handled them." I opened the front door. "Goodbye, Richard." He looked at me, at the box, at the life he had just torched, and a sob escaped his lips. As he stumbled out into the twilight, I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and felt the profound, satisfying click of a lock falling into place for the final time. 6 months later, I was sitting in what used to be Richard's office. It was my office now. I had completely redesigned the space, replacing the dark, heavy mahogany and leather with clean lines, glass, and light. The name on the door was no longer Vantage Marketing. I had rebranded the company to Phoenix Strategy, a name that felt both appropriate and deeply personal. The business was thriving. It turned out that my mind for forensic accounting and strategic planning translated beautifully to the marketing world. I had a knack for seeing patterns and leveraging assets that Richard, in his blustering self-aggrandizement, had always overlooked. I had trimmed the fat, fired the sycophants he had hired, and promoted the talented, hard-working people he had ignored. Morale was at an all-time high, and profits had increased by 30% in just 2 quarters. My daughter Lily was my biggest cheerleader. She was in her first year of graduate school, and she would call me every night, her voice filled with a new kind of respect and pride. "You're a legend, Mom," she'd told me last week. An absolute icon. The knowledge that I hadn't just secured her future but had also shown her what a strong, independent woman looked like was a victory far sweeter than any financial settlement. Clara and I had a standing Friday night dinner to celebrate our weekly wins. We sat at a corner table in a chic new restaurant, raising our glasses of champagne. "To Phoenix strategy," she toasted, her eyes sparkling, "and to the ashes it rose from." We laughed, a real full-throated laugh of shared triumph. I did see Richard once. I was driving home from a late night at the office when I saw him. He was working as a valet at a downtown hotel, his shoulders slumped in the ill-fitting red jacket. Our eyes met for a fleeting second across the rain-slicked pavement. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment, just a hollow, haunted emptiness. He looked away first. I didn't feel pity, nor did I feel a vengeful glee. I felt nothing at all. He was simply a ghost from a past life, a closed chapter in a book I was still busy writing. I drove on, turning up the music, the city lights blurring into a beautiful kaleidoscope around me. My life was my own, built from the ground up on my terms, and I was just getting started.